We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to pick the laws. We enforce them. But at the end of the day, each and every member is to go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne. It is June 7th, 2016, and we're coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, Tumblr, YouTube, Twitter, and SoundCloud, as well as by the next day on Stitcher. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty and self-ownership, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom. Exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And we are happy to hear from you. And you can reach us by phone at 702-470-7664 or via Skype at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. It is one word, and you can send a contact request. You only have to do that once. Let us know your name, what you want to talk about, and we'll get you on the air. And you can check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, which has the links to all our social media. Various articles, blogs, different things. I'm actually working on a series right now on the war on drugs, and we have 3 articles posted so far on that, and the 4th is pretty much done as far as all of the information is written out. It's just more of organizing it together, and we'll try to get that up there as soon as possible. And speaking of drugs, tonight we will be talking all about them. If you got a chance to hear the very beginning of the show, I played 2 songs about cocaine, which hopefully will not get my show, or this show, not my show in general, but this episode, not banned on YouTube, but they won't allow me to monetize it or whatever. Usually I've gotten copyright warnings, but I've never done anything on purpose really. And I've never done anything over 30 seconds. So I've never got anything that's been taken off. It's just, you can't monetize it. And really, it's not like I make any money off of YouTube. I mean, I think in total so far I've made like 12 cents or something. So it's not a big deal or anything like that, but it just kind of sucks. It's like, well, you know, how come I can't monetize this? And a lot of them were for not reasons of copyright, were for actual reasons of content. So I mentioned this before, but I want to mention it again. I did a bunch of shows on drugs, and I did some specifically on heroin and opiates. I think I did 2 or 3. And I didn't get on the air saying, hey, go do fucking heroin and go do opiates. They're bad for you. I've never advocated drugs in any way. I've never said you should go and do drugs. They're good for you. Nothing like that. I merely said that I believe they should be legal because on so many different levels. And that's what the series that I'm writing on the war on drugs is about. It's not just about the war on drugs. It's also about the fact that they should be legal, and legal like they were prior to 1914. And if you want to know how they were prior to 1914, you could buy morphine in the Sears and Roebuck catalog along with a carrying case and 2 syringes. And that's what I believe. Now, that doesn't mean I advocate going out and doing it. And there's a difference that a lot of people do not understand because of their ignorance or for what they've been brainwashed or taught their whole life, especially if you grew up in the 80s and got the whole Reagan war against drugs bullshit. Even though Reagan, and I will do a show on this in the near future, possibly next week. I just want to make sure I have enough information to talk about it intelligently. But the Iran-Contra scandal, or whatever you want to call it, it's much bigger than a scandal. But what I'm going to talk about tonight, the Medellin Cartel, and focus on Pablo Escobar, but there are others involved. One of them, Carlos Later, who was the character in Blow. In Blow, they used the name Diego Delgado, and he was based on his character. But pretty much all of the things that happened in Blow relating to the character Diego were pretty much real, because I did go back, and George Jung, who was Johnny Depp's character, is out of jail now, and you can find interviews with him on YouTube. I actually have one that I might possibly play tonight. So he got out in 2014, and he's done interviews. Plus, I saw a documentary, because the book, I didn't know this, was actually written in 1994. And for people that have seen the movie, and I guess this is a spoiler alert, sort of, but at the end of the movie, he goes to jail basically until now. I mean, he gets sentenced to, at the time, I think it's earlier, when he supposedly gets sentenced. And really, he got sentenced in 94 for 20 years, and he got out, in 2014. But in the movie, it makes it seem like he got sentenced in 87 when he got arrested, although it doesn't say the date, I believe. I don't believe it says that it was on that. But when he was arrested then, he actually testified against Carlos Later, and he got to walk free totally, not even probation or parole. So he got off of that charge, but it was another charge later that ended him up in jail for the 20 years. So it was a little different than what they made it seem like in the movie. They made it seem like he was going away pretty much the rest of his life, although I will say that 20 years is a long fucking time. So, being in jail for 2 days, thinking about 20 years, I can't imagine how. And this is for drugs. And this is also a guy, we're not talking about Pablo Escobar and the Medellin Cartel yet. We're talking about George Jung, who was strictly, as far as I know, a distributor of cocaine. That's it. So in his case, he never hurt anybody. He wasn't an enforcer. He had nothing to do with that end of it. He was just the middleman importing the drugs into the United States and selling them. And I know some people have this whole fucking thing that somehow the drug dealer is responsible. We've gotten into, and I shouldn't say we, because I haven't, and I don't want to be associated with a we of anything, but the majority of Americans, or at least a certain amount, have gotten into this fucking mentality that somehow people are not responsible for their own actions. That's why so much government is needed in their mind. And that people not being responsible for their actions in turn means that somebody else is responsible for what they did. So meaning that in the case of someone becoming a drug addict, it's not their fault. It's the person that sold it, which is the most ridiculous fucking thing I've ever heard. And they apply that to various things. So I don't care if a person's trying to push drugs on you, unless, you know, if someone had a gun to your head and said, if you don't inject this, then I'm going to kill you. Okay, that's a different scenario. And I bet the amount of times that has actually happened are, far and few between. And it has never happened as a way to get somebody to buy drugs from you. You see that in movies, like possibly it's happened in reality to, fuck somebody up while you're, trying to get back at them for something, or I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a scenario in a movie, because I have seen that happen in a movie. Besides that, I've never heard of it actually happening in reality. So point being that if you use drugs or alcohol or cigarettes or any of these things, and being somebody who, I haven't drank, and I'm not somebody who goes to AA or considers myself an alcoholic, although some people might try to tell you that, but I just don't feel like drinking anymore. Like, there's nothing stopping me from drinking as far as, if I have a drink, I'll do something and I'm an alcoholic and I can't have a drink. Like, there's nothing like that. I don't like it anymore at all. I just don't. So, which I think is a positive thing, because I think alcohol is a very bad substance. But at the same time, when I did drink, if I did something stupid, that's on me. That's not on the manufacturer of the alcohol, or because this is what they try to do. So being that I thought of this now, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I have a lot to talk about. But let's take alcohol and compare it to the Medellin Cartel as far as the distribution part. Now, we have a whole different story here, because you have murders and things like that. And how much of the murders were done by the Medellin Cartel? Of course, the news says they were. And I was thinking about that earlier, and I don't know what to believe anymore when it comes to media. I don't know what Pablo Escobar did and what he didn't. I don't know what type of a man he was. I'm sure he murdered people. It's hard not to believe that part of it based on a lot of accounts of what went on. But did he commit every murder that the government claims? Probably not. But who knows? Maybe he did. The problem is you'll never hear his side of the story, because they either he killed himself or they killed him. Now, his son came out with a book recently. I don't know how recent this was, but I'll play the clip. It's a real quick clip that he died the exact way he said he would, meaning that he shot himself in the spot, I guess in his temple or whatnot, where he told his son he would if it came down to that. Because in the case of the police, I mean, they obviously were going to kill him. They had said that before, that from what I understand and what I've heard. And I've watched so many documentaries now on Pablo Escobar. It's not even funny. And read a bunch of stuff as well and on different people in the Medellin Cartel, although I don't know as much about them. But he said that his son had said that he would have killed himself that way because he didn't say this, but I'm just saying this, that if the police shoot you and you could end up living, and that's probably the worst thing that could possibly happen, because not only do you get shot and seriously injured and who knows what the injury is going to be, then you're going to go to jail, and that's just, I'd rather just be dead, to be honest, or never be in that situation in the first place. But of course, assuming that you are, your choice is either getting shot and living and going to jail, or just dying. I personally would rather just die. But besides that part of it, so that's kind of that's being disputed by his son. That and does it really matter? Not to most people. I think it's an honor type of thing, or I had a friend say to me before when I was a kid that I'd rather shoot myself than have the police's bullets going into me or something. And this was when I was like a teenager, and I hung out with some people that I don't think they were people that really did anything serious, but they would talk like they did. But because usually the people that talk about shit aren't real, but not that this person did, but they just said hypothetically that they would rather shoot themselves than have the lead of the police kill them. And to me, I mean, really, what's the fucking difference? I don't care. If you're gonna die, you're gonna die. Just make sure that you're dead. I mean, that's all I would say in that situation. But if you take out the violence, and of course, the violence and the crime is because it's illegal. If it was a legal business, and we'll compare it to alcohol, which I think is a much more dangerous drug than what I know about cocaine. Now, I'll admit, I'm basing cocaine off of, I did do a psychology, an abnormal psych paper on crack and cocaine a long time ago. I've never done it. I know people who have done it. And so I'm basing it off of that than the actual experience of using cocaine, where I can say, you know, I've drank in alcohol so many times I can't count. But either way, if you look at, and I would say that what I've seen from cocaine and even the addiction, I guess on an addiction level, it's harder. That's the whole thing. I was kind of saying this to somebody a couple nights ago, that if alcohol was really easy to get addicted to, and this whole shit that doing something once and you're addicted and that's the drug's fault and it's not something within your brain chemistry is a bunch of bullshit, because I've talked about before that, you know, I had periods in my life where, you know, I broke my ankle. I took painkillers for 4 months and didn't have an addiction at that point at all. I stopped. I didn't have withdrawal, nothing after 4 months. So, and, you know, I've never done heroin. I've never done crystal meth. So I don't want to say that 100% I can tell somebody, hey, I know you can't, you know, get addicted from taking something once, but it's pretty hard to believe. I'll put it that way. I can't really or don't want to speak for other people and their experiences when I haven't had those experiences or tried the same thing. But if you take a liquor company, we'll just, I don't know, Bacardi rum or just Bacardi, and they make, a bunch of rums, and they make those Bacardi breezers and stuff like that, and they're constantly coming up with new products, actually, of the different coolers. I know they've had a bunch, but the Bacardi rum has been there for years, since at least I started drinking, and I'm sure it will be around. It was around before that, and it'll be around for a long time. But they have the gold and the silver and whatever. So anyway, so take Bacardi, which is a corporation. I don't know how exactly it is structured, if it is publicly traded or not, how their executive structure is set up, but that's kind of irrelevant. It will say they have a CEO, and for all intents and purposes, we'll say that, they're just like any other corporation, except they make and sell alcohol, which is fine because it's legal. And now you can even advertise alcohol on TV, where I believe they had a ban that you couldn't advertise liquor on TV, but you could beer, which, again, I don't have a problem with that neither. So you have, in this process, you have the plant where they make and bottle. And I don't know, with something like rum, the process of how long, where beer, like, it has to ferment and it takes a certain amount of time, and, or wine, people will go in and step on their grapes and whatever. They have different processes. So we'll just say you have the chemical plant process, right? Then you have that, we'll say from there you have the bottling process, where the product has been established into what it is. It's already rum and ready to, you could drink it. It's just not bottled. So they have a bottling a bottling facility. I don't know if that's how it is, but for our purposes, this will work. So then from there, it's shipped to, we'll say, wholesalers, a warehouse. And then the warehouse will go and ship it to the store. So that's 4 parts right there. We have the making of the rum, the chemical side of it, whatever they have to do chemically to turn it into rum. Then the bottling aspect, where it's already been made, but it's being packaged. Then the wholesaler, then it would go to a warehouse, to the wholesaler, and then it would be sold to the individual stores, and then sold to the customer directly from the stores, right? So if we're talking about cocaine, and I learned a lot of this from the documentaries as well as even the show Narcos, and we'll talk a little about that, because there are a lot of things that are based on facts. I even watched a presentation by the 2 U.S. DEA agents who are the characters in the show. Not the characters in the show, like the real guys gave a speech. So I watched the presentation from the real guys that the characters are based on. And they talked about, some of the stuff. So with cocaine, it would pretty much be the same type process. So what they did was they had most of their chemical plants in the jungle. You take the coca leaves, I guess there'd be an extra step, but not really, because I don't know what's going into the chemicals of the Bacardi. So I kind of skipped that out. So you could say part one of Bacardi is getting whatever chemicals you need. So, and then getting it to the plant. So same thing, getting whatever chemicals you need. One of those is just the plant. The coca leaf is, from what I understand, the main ingredient of cocaine. Now, what a coca leaf can do by itself, I don't know if it does anything, because I believe coca leaves are in coffee as well, but I could be mistaken. But I don't know if you take a coca leaf and chew on it or eat it or something, if it's going to get you high, or like if you dry it out and snort it or something. I don't know. I doubt it. So there's other chemicals that go into this process. So what the cartel had was, out in the jungle, they built these processing plants for the cocaine, and they turned it into some kind of paste, and they'd finally get it into, obviously, the white powder. So it would be the same thing. They take the chemicals, they process it into it was a paste, but then they had to do something else to turn it into the white powder. So we'll say that they did that part of it, then they packaged it, we'll say, in kilos. I don't know exactly how, the packaging part of it was taking place, but for all intents and purposes, we'll say they, and I think that's how they did it, where they packaged it in the kilos. Although they probably did it all in the same place, as opposed to having another place to do that. But I know they did move the paste somewhere. So, but it might have been like part of the whole setup in the jungle, like right there, where they just moved it over here and then did whatever. So we'll say they had the packaging, and then that was the packaged kilos. Then they would go to somebody like Pablo Escobar, who would be the main wholesaler. And then the difference would be that instead of, in the scenario with Bacardi, I'm talking about, say, one wholesaler. So, well, I guess it would go to a bunch of different warehouses, because if you talk about something like Bacardi, I'm sure they drink it all over the world. So we'll say they go to a bunch of different warehouses. But first, we'll say it goes to the main Bacardi people, the main distributor, and then it's distributed to a bunch of other distributors, warehouses around the country. Because that's actually probably how it would work with Bacardi as well. So they'd ship it to the West Coast, the East Coast. They have a warehouse in the Midwest. They have a warehouse in Mexico. They have, whatever. All over the world, wherever they drink Bacardi. And I'm sure it's pretty much everywhere. Most alcohols, I would think, that are that big as something like Bacardi would be shipped all over the world. So then, from after the cocaine went from somebody like Pablo Escobar or other people in the Medellin Cartel, they give to people like George Jung, who then would sell to lower distributors, who then there'd be a lot more steps, is the only difference, because you could get it from the user is going to be way further down the line, is the only difference. You're adding in like 5 or 6 steps, because probably before it gets to you, it probably went through the hands of 5 or 6 different people, depending on, where you are. Because the closer you are to the cocaine, the less hands it probably touched, because the less places it probably went to. Where if it's coming from Colombia and say it's stopping somewhere in Central America, and then it's stopping somewhere in Mexico, and then it's going to, say, Miami, or if in Mexico, it'd probably go to Texas or Arizona, and then it's going to, say, California or something like that, or coming up from Mexico through to California. So the only difference really would be that in the distributor side, it would just be broken down into so many more distributors. And of course, every time it passes hands, the price goes up. And they went through this in Narcos, how the coca leaves, what they're worth in Peru, where they were getting them from. Then when they get to the point where they get to paste, and then it goes up. And then when they transfer it to this place, and it goes up. And then the further it's got to travel, in one of the documentaries, they mentioned, say, Europe. And Europe, because if you're looking from Colombia to Europe, that's a lot further away than, say, Miami. So you got to go through a lot more to get it to England than to get it to Florida. So you're going through a lot more risk. But this could all be eliminated because, one, of course, you'd cut out about 5 middlemen at minimum. That would cut the price down. You wouldn't have to worry about getting stopped and losing. There's also that side of it. The price is higher because you're losing loads, number one. Number two is that every time you move it, you have to worry about losing the load. So there's risk. Not only losing the load, but getting arrested, whoever is the person that is transporting the drug, whatever country it is. And I know they say in Portugal drugs are legal. They're not as legal as you think they are. And the same with Amsterdam. They're not as legal as you think they are. They're not like, I believe Portugal is decriminalized for certain possession. You're going to get a ticket. But if you're a big drug dealer, I don't think it actually works that way, where it's just like totally legal to distribute, and that you really couldn't have a company. The only reason you can do that with marijuana is because you can pretty much grow marijuana anywhere. And with like different, and I'm far from an expert in this, and I don't know much about it, period, but I know there's new ways to even grow marijuana indoors and stuff like that. And there's all this technology with growing, I should actually call it cannabis, because marijuana is the government. There was something behind that of it being a racist or something like that. And when I first heard that, I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? But there is actually something behind that, so you should call it cannabis. But whatever. Either way, the point being is that they don't have to rely on another country shipping it here, because if they did, they're probably not going to get it. Or I don't even know, they may, but I don't even know how that would work. Because, so I'm saying, in the event that a country legalized all drugs 100%, how they would even get drugs into the country when every other country is trying to stop drugs. So that would be very difficult unless they were growing everything themselves, or depending on the drug. I know some drugs are based off chemicals, unfortunately. I mean, every drug they're using chemicals to process certain things, but I mean, are based off of chemicals that can do a lot of damage to you, like crystal meth, and don't originate from things like poppies or, coca leaves. Or that's where, to me, even though it's addictive, from what I looked up, and I've talked about this before, and I'm not talking about heroin because or anything on the street. I'm not talking about anything on the street, but any of the pharmaceutical opium-based painkillers, from what I have read, do not cause any long-term damage. And that's, from what I understand, I mean, they're because they're based off of, not to say there aren't plants that aren't dangerous, because there are, but it is still natural. Now, when heroin is not, it's all fucked up. And I know even painkillers are, there's some synthetic stuff in it, but I think the majority of it is, made from opium. But, and just like, why marijuana is, or cannabis is not something that's bad for you neither, because cannabis is totally based off of the plant, where you're not doing anything to it. You don't have to do anything to it, where you can just take the plant and pretty much dry it out and roll it up or whatever, or you don't really have to dry it up. So the more natural it is, the better. And when you get away from that, because you can't get those type of things, just like I talked about, I don't know if I talked about kratom before. I call it kratom because it sounds better, but it is just really, they say it gives you an opium type high if you take enough. And I've actually had it before, and it's legal. You can buy it at smoke shops, or at least it's legal in Nevada. It's not legal in all states. It's on the DEA's list, and it's 100% natural. It's just the plant crushed up, literally. There's nothing added to it. It's just the plant, and they just crush it up into a powder and put it in a capsule, or you can put it in tea, and it's 100% natural. And so the more natural you get, the better. And it does have, if you take enough of them, and I've never heard of anybody ODing off it neither, it is similar to a opium type, pain relief. I don't think it's as strong. And then if you take a couple, it kind of, gives you energy. That's what other people have said to me. I've never taken it and got energy from it. But that's what other people have, that have said to me. And this is something that the DEA has on their list, and they'll probably be banning it in a couple years. So, and at the same time, again, we have the U.S. government who is bringing in all this opium from Afghanistan, guarding the poppy plants. And I have no problem, again, with, I think drugs should be totally legal. It's the hypocrisy. And you had it with the Iran-Contra thing, and that's what I want to go into that at some point, where the government was involved in selling drugs. You have it with Vietnam, with opium, and then bringing back drugs. And that might have been a major part of why they stayed there. Who knows? Which may be a major part of Afghanistan as well. Who knows who is there and who is not? You don't really get any information. And the government just does whatever the fuck they want. And then people sit there and complain and know that the government's corrupt, but then ask for more government, or if we get different people, or if we just follow these rules, or I'm talking about these, this is what other people say when I'm saying we, but if we just, become a socialist country where the government has even more control and more power, which makes no sense at all. If you're complaining about the government, unless you're complaining about the government not giving you enough money, I guess, in your welfare check, or the government not doing enough for you, giving you shit, then I understand. But if you're complaining about the government being corrupt, politicians being corrupt, taking too much money in taxes, extorting you, police killing people, police violating your rights, any of these things that are government functions. And it's just, it's so frustrating because I watched a whole documentary on Iran-Contra today or listened. And it's just so frustrating. And I can sit here and try to explain to everybody how fucked up things are. And if people, for one, even take the time to listen, for the people that do listen, do they really even give a fuck anyway? I guess if they are actually taking the time to listen, they do. But are they going to get it? And are they going to see things for what they really are? Because I would take the Medellin Cartel and tell you that essentially the U.S. government is probably not just as bad as the Medellin Cartel, but they're worse because they're so much more powerful. And that might be a shock to some people. And of course, the Medellin Cartel is now the same. This is the war on drugs. You eliminate one cartel, and then you get now it's the Mexican cartels. And then if you were to get rid of the Mexican cartels, who knows? Some other cartels in some other country is going to pop up. And then if you get rid of one drug, another drug's going to come up. And it's going to be a drug that some mastermind chemist comes up with, taking household chemicals. That's like crystal meth. I mean, it's not that you can just make crystal meth from household chemicals, but that was something that people could make here. And from what I understand, it's gone back to Mexico. People from here have trained them. I don't know. That doesn't really make sense why they would move it back to Mexico. Maybe in Mexico it's easier for them to get away with it, but then they still got to get it back here. So it doesn't really make sense. But anyway, so the point being is that people want what they want when it comes to, if it's sex, if it's drugs, when it comes to pleasure type things. So you can keep trying to stop these things and make the situation worse, which is what they've done. Because if drugs were legal in the United States, it's the United States. Don't get it twisted. It shit's straight up U.S. Because if the United States legalized drugs, I guarantee you half of the world would follow. But it's the U.S. because the U.S. is giving money to all these countries. They're controlling the fucking world. They're an empire, but they do it in a different way. Instead of, I mean, they do it through war as well, like what they do in the Middle East, but they also do it through money. They say, look, we want you guys to do this. And if you do it, hey, we'll help you out. We'll give you, a certain amount of money every year. You can look at the list of countries. I don't even know. That's the money on the books. You got to remember that money disappears all the time. And we know that at least once for a fact that $3 trillion was unaccounted for the day before 9/11 when Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense at the time, came out and told us that. And that's the time they told us. And who knows where that money went, probably to, black ops or whatever they're working on, or who. That's the whole thing. Is I have to sit here and I can do all the research I want and I can come to, I think, logical conclusions, but most of the things you can't prove shit, because who's going to talk to you that's actually a part of the system to validate it? Now, there are a lot of declassified or unclassified documents that no one cares about that you can find and prove that way. But either way, they don't seem to care. And which reminds me, I'm hearing a helicopter outside my house. Over the weekend at about 2 a.m. on Saturday, and I posted some of the video, a helicopter for about 45 minutes circled around. It looked like it was circling around my house specifically, but it was like probably, the houses, maybe the 4 houses in that little area, because the houses are really close where I live. So they're like circling around for literally about 45 minutes. And I went out and took a picture and got them on video. And I'm sure they, have nice pictures of me now. But it sounds like right now that they're like circling outside. Now, I could just be hearing a plane or a helicopter flying by, but I'm not going to step away to look at it right now. If that's what they're doing, that's what they're doing. But this is where we're going anyway, again, with the control. And what I was meaning after watching that documentary, or what I was kind of referring to, is they were saying the same shit. This was a documentary made in 1988, and they were saying all the same shit that they're saying now about the Constitution, about the power the government has. About, it's just, and this is over 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And it's scary. It's scarier when you look, I was a little kid, so I recall the Iran-Contra thing, and I remember the Oliver North testimony. I don't remember what he said. I just remember he gave testimony, and I remember Reagan vividly. I do remember Reagan saying that he had no recollection. But I think, of course, all that is bullshit. But it's not that it changed my opinion on anything, because I've said for a long time, I think this goes back to when the government started. It goes back to right after the Constitution. So I'm not disillusioned in any way, and that doesn't change my opinion. What I was thinking was, how can people not see this? Like, I'm watching this from 1988, And people are talking about things now like people were talking about things in 1988. Like how fucked up they were. And I'm sure if I watch something from fucking 1978, I'd get the same thing. Like when, and I don't know if they have videotapes of this, but when MK Ultra came out and they had hearings in Congress on them. I don't know if it's something when they started videotaping Congress. I mean, I would think in the late 70s. I mean, my grandfather that had a camera, I think, in the late 70s, very late 70s. But so, I mean, the technology was there. But I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'll get into the Medellin Cartel and Pablo Escobar, a little about the show, and my thoughts on the war on drugs, why I think it should be legal, and I also wrote an article on Pablo Escobar, and looking back, I feel like I left some things out, but you can find that at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Just go to article/blogs, and under it, you'll see the war on drugs. And so far, as I said, there's 3 articles there, and I'm working on a 4th. And this is going to be something that is ongoing, because this is one of the things that I think has destroyed not only the United States, but probably a lot of the world, all being prompted, I think, by the United States. Although China, went after opium, and then you had Mao when they became communists, just killing people in possession of opium. So it's not 100% the U.S., but at least in this hemisphere it is, and in other countries as well. So it's something that, the other show I did, where I talked about how drugs being illegal affects the freedom of everybody, whether you do drugs, possess drugs, or not. It's irrelevant. And people are dead that never were in possession of a drug in their life. And they're dead because of the war on drugs. There are kids that are dead because of the war on drugs. There are probably millions that are dead because of the war on drugs. So this is not really, the war on drugs has less to do with drugs than it does with people's freedom and safety. They talk about safety and trying to protect the people and keep them safe. And in supposedly trying to protect them, they're actually hurting them. And that's because they're not trying to protect them, and we all know that. So I'm going to play a couple clips. I will definitely play the one about the murder of Pablo Escobar, the 2 stories about those. And we also have an interview with Boston George Jung, and they ask him about his meetings with Pablo Escobar, although it doesn't talk a lot about it, but he was involved in the Medellin cartel. So we'll talk about those, or we'll play those clips, and when we come back, we will talk more about the Medellin cartel, as well as Narcos and the quote-unquote war on drugs that seems to continue. So be sure to check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And and be sure to read the articles there as well. And you can check out all the archives on Spreaker.com. So we'll be right back. Nonpartisan liberty for all.
They enter the building. Major Aguilar is one of the first inside.
I heard him. He was still talking on the phone. We were panic-stricken. Pablo Escobar realized we were coming up the stairs and said, "Something's happening. I'll call you back." He takes out his gun, so I start shooting.
Escobar's lone bodyguard shoots back and is killed. Escobar races to the window. On the street below, search block troops close in. Aguilar is close behind. The killer is shot 3 times, once in the head.
At the height of his cartel business, Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar was smuggling a reported 15 tons of cocaine a day into the United States. Later, in 1993, the world's most violent and notorious drug lord was gunned down by police on a Medellin rooftop. That has been the story that has always been reported, but Colombia's cocaine king's only son has now claimed his father took his own life in a new book. Called My Father, Juan Pablo Escobar's book provides an intimate portrait of his father, from his habits, escapades and even a family betrayal by Pablo Escobar's brother and former Medellin Cartel accountant Roberto Escobar. The claims come more than 2 decades after Pablo Escobar's death, with his son saying Colombia is finally ready to hear his story.
My idea was a personal decision to tell the story in the first person with the intention of telling the truth about what happened during those days. I also think that with the necessary passing of time, there's been a necessary maturity, not just in myself, but also in Colombia as a country. It is more ready to hear these types of revelations.
According to officials, the head of the Medellin Cartel was killed in a shootout with Colombian security forces who were surrounding his hideout. The drug lord was reportedly shot dead as he tried to escape via the roof. But his son has told media that his father had planned to take his own life.
I don't believe in coincidences. The bullet happened exactly in the same place where my dad told me that he had set the date where he was to be trapped. He always mentioned that from the 15 bullets in his gun, 14 would be for his enemies and the last one for him. This was not just a conversation I had with him, but with my mother, my sister, with his mother, with all members of the family. It was known, and there is even a recording of which there is a transcript in the book, and it literally says, and I quote, "They will never screw me over alive."
Following Escobar's death, Juan Pablo, his mother and sister moved to Argentina to start a new life. He has now said nothing is left of his father's billion-dollar cartel empire.
Look at my father's history. All the history he built is in ruins. Nothing is left standing, not him. He lost his freedom many years before his death, and as did his family as well. So the only thing that remains are some strong lessons that I hope will be understood clearly.
Now, what led up to you actually doing hard prison time for marijuana?
Hard prison time. What happened is that I jumped bail, and it wasn't exactly hard prison time. It was in Danbury, Connecticut. It was a federal prison, and it was, I guess you could call a medium-low security prison, and it was full of mob guys that had been penitentiaries or whatever, and they're filtered down. And another act of serendipity, when I first went into the reception dorm, was where they put you before they assign you to another dormitory, okay, where you're going to stay for a long time. I actually got a 5-year sentence, and at that time you did 1/3 and you got out on parole, 20 months. So it wasn't, the mandatory sentencing was a long way from taking effect until then. And actually it wasn't a hard prison time. I taught school there, and they assigned me to, ironically, a bunkmate called Carl Slater from Colombia. And Carlos was in there for stealing cars and shipping them to South America. All right, not cocaine. But yet, he asked me, what am I doing here? And I told him I was flying pot out of Mexico, da, 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 da. And he said, do you know anything about cocaine? And I didn't. And he said, you know, it costs $60,000 a kilo. Then the wheels in my head began to spin, like, you know, at high velocity. And I said, you know what? I know how to get that out of there. And that's how it all began with him. And it was another act of serendipity. And we waited till we got out, and then we went into business. And, you know, then I climbed aboard the starship to hell.
So Carlos later, he was part of the Medellin Cartel.
At that time, there wasn't any Medellin Cartel. There was just Carl Slater and I, and who later on, who I met, Pablo Escobar and a bunch of other people who didn't have a market in the United States, a major market, or a major transportation system. And when it all culminated and came together, then, like any business in the world, it became the cartel, like the oil cartel, the banking cartels, whatever. It was just a name, all right? And a group of people who were intent on profit, and pure profit, would stop at nothing to get it.
So how much did you actually deal with Pablo Escobar back then?
I had only business meetings with him, and I don't know if you can equate it in hours or minutes or moments or whatever, but each moment was an intensity unto itself, and it may have seemed like days, a moment with him, but I didn't stay there very long. I just, you know, my purpose was to get the stuff in there, get the planes in there, and get the merchandise out of there, and market in the United States, and bring back the money or whatever. Because Colombia is a beautiful country, but it was consumed in a violence that was becoming so intense that it was, you know, insensible to stay there any one period of time.
Okay, now there was a scene in Blow where you show up. Well, you know, Johnny Depp playing you shows up, and Carlos Escobar just recently executed someone, I guess, for snitching. You know, did you actually see any of this violence around Pablo Escobar?
Well, you know, there are certain points of the interview that I didn't want to go into, okay? I mean, it happened, whatever, and, you know, the movies are the movies, and what happened is between Pablo and myself, and I don't wish to go there.
Okay. So, at the height of your cocaine business, how much, I guess you were making $15 million per plane load of cocaine? Like, how much money were you making back then?
Well, what I was doing is charging for transportation. We were charging $10,000 a kilo to move it. All right, and some of the marketing happened with another individual in Los Angeles, just hooked into the movie and record industry. But if I brought 500 kilos, okay, 10,000 a kilo, it was $5 million a trip. And I was making several trips a week, and then it grew to 1,000 kilos, okay, and how much was I making a week? Was millions and millions of dollars, tax-free.
How much do you think you made the whole time? Was it $100 million?
What do you mean? My entire existence from marijuana to cocaine?
Well, how much did you make just in cocaine, you think? I mean, if you want to combine it, that's fine. But
Okay, well, several hundred million.
several $100 million in cocaine.
Right.
You think you made $1 billion total during your whole
Well, at that
drug
time,
business?
in the economy and the equation of compared to then and now, it was $1 billion.
Okay, so you made the equivalent of about $1 billion. What do you think? What was the most extravagant thing you did making that much money?
I went to Baskin Robbins.
What does that mean?
The most extravagant thing, it's all relative in an existentialist question. I mean, what is most extravagant? I just lived my life to the fullest, with the intensity of 1,000 suns, and pursued the most beautiful women on the planet and traveled all over the world and had a goddamn good time for myself. And after a while, when you're doing all that and you have total free will, nothing is extravagant. Extravagance becomes normal.
One there. One on my back there. You see it?
Carlos Lader's secret cocaine base in the Bahamas has made him a multi-millionaire. What he wants now is political power in Colombia. Lader sets up a Nazi-inspired party called the National Latin American Movement.
And his ideal was German-style control of running Latin America. He was going to be following the philosophy of Adolf Hitler and build a new Latin American reign. In my opinion, he lost it. He was out of control.
But his lavish spending and fancy lifestyle attracts unwelcome attention. A Colombian terrorist group called the April 19th Movement, or M19, tries to kidnap Lader for ransom. But Lader gives his kidnappers the slip and escapes. Now he wants revenge. He calls together Escobar and the other top cocaine traffickers.
They knew they had a problem with the terrorists. They wanted to protect themselves. In unity, there is strength.
Later, Escobar and the others form a vigilante group they call Muerte a Secuestradores, or Death to Kidnappers, MAS for short. Once again, Lader airdrops flyers. This time they're not carrying cash, but a brutal threat. MAS will kill anyone trying to kidnap the cocaine barons. By setting up MAS, Lader has done more than destroy the kidnap threat. He's created a monster that will plague Colombia for years to come.
The light bulb went on, and they said to each other, why are we fighting with each other? Why are we competing with each other? Let's ban our talents and our resources, and we'll be much stronger and much more capable of shipping cocaine and selling cocaine, distributing cocaine in the United States and perhaps elsewhere, and we'll all make a lot more money doing that. So that is truly how the Medellin Cartel was born.
Lader's name joins Pablo Escobar at the top of the DEA's list of most wanted Colombian cocaine traffickers. Later's network of dealers in the USA gives him the final word on drug shipments.
Pablo Escobar said, Carlos, you son of a bitch, I got 80,000 kilos sitting here. I already been paid for them, and I have to deliver them all over the world. What are you going to do for me? And Carlos will say, well, you have to be patient. I can only move 2,000 at a time, or 5,000 at a time. And there was nothing Pablo could do except wait.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in. Username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and we are back. Regarding it's unclear a little when you look at some of these depictions of the movies, the documentaries, and who says what, and different people's interpretations of things. Like, there is a clip that says it really wasn't Pablo Escobar who was the main guy, he was the fall guy. And I'll play that later, that it was the Ochoa brothers, I believe their name. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. The Ochoa brothers. Now, according to Wikipedia, two of those brothers, because you don't hear a lot about them, which is actually what you want. And when I say what you want, not, like what we want, like that matters. But I mean, if you're them, if you're a drug dealer, you don't want to be mentioned in the media. You don't want to be in the spotlight. The whole point is to go under the radar, not to be in the public eye. And Pablo Escobar and Carlos Later were both people that were in the public eye, especially through politics. Now, I know Carlos Later built a whole island, basically. It was for the purposes of distributing more cocaine because he built an airstrip there, Norman's Cay, and he still brought more attention to himself because of that. And of course, Pablo Escobar was actually a alternate in Congress in Colombia, and then he had become an actual, I don't know what they called them over there, if it was a senator or a representative or something like that. And then it's confusing because in Narcos, it's one guy who comes out and starts talking out about him because of the DEA. And then in actuality, it had nothing to do with that. He right away knew who Pablo Escobar was and started accusing him of all of these things. And of course, he had to leave politics at that time. But from a lot of these documentaries, it was important to him to give back to the people and to be involved in politics. You really don't know or don't get a sense of who this person really is. Of course, if you look at all the killings that they attribute to him, he seems like a pretty sick guy. There was a statement made in, it was probably by a government agent, that they compared him to Hitler, which I think is a little, not a little, I think that's a huge, what's the word I'm looking for? Exaggeration there to compare Pablo Escobar to Hitler. Essentially, Pablo Escobar declared war on the government. He went to war with the government. Now, there's certain things I can actually look at, and I wouldn't say admire wouldn't be the word, but respect. But at the same time, if he's responsible for, there was a plane that went down. So he was trying to kill a presidential candidate, and this is the story. Now, this story, of course, comes from government agents, but that he was trying to kill the presidential candidate that was, well, let me take a step back. What caused a lot of the problems with Pablo Escobar and the Medellin Cartel against the government was extradition to the United States. So prior to a lot of the things that happened, there was no extradition from Colombia to the U.S. Now, first of all, President Reagan signed and I don't know if this was before or after because I'm unsure of the year, but President Reagan signed I think it was an executive order that they will extradite, I think I have the exact what he had said somewhere, but that they will extradite members of drug traffickers. So you think about that for a second, and what he's saying, that that it's a crime against the United States, and that they will extradite them. So they're basically saying, okay, I found where I had it, that drug trafficking is a threat to national security. So meaning that, well, first of all, what's a drug trafficker? So if you're, say, Pablo Escobar, you're not shipping anything directly to the U.S. That may be the end destination, but you're not directly shipping anything. So what the U.S. government is saying, that anybody who ships drugs, period, because you don't know where they're going to end up, is committing a crime against the United States. So that's what they wanted to extradite people on. And I think that in itself is not only overstepping the bounds of the country, of the U.S.'s authority, which, I don't believe in government authority, period, but is infringing on the whole rest of the world. And at the same time, the U.S. government is bringing cocaine into the country to fund the Contras. And we'll go into that on another night. But so they're doing it themselves anyway, but they're saying you can't do it. And that's what the government does, is they can do it, but you can't do it. So how they can do that, and of course what happens is countries like Colombia, they give money to. So they say, hey, you're going to do this, or, and they can also, they do the same thing with the states. They tell a state, if you don't pass this law, we're not going to give you money for this, or we're not going to give you money for that. And that's why I believe that countries and states should do what they can to be self-sustaining and to be able to survive without having to rely on countries like the United States. But and how their money's even matters at this point, how it's worth anything. Well, because it's the reserve currency, and we've talked about that before, and because of oil. But they do things like that. Or they could do a trade embargo. There's things that they can do because they're the most powerful country, to say, if you don't abide by what we say, that we're going to do this. So what caused the problems, where the violence seemed to start. Now, I'm not saying that from the beginning, Pablo Escobar seemed to use violence, and that violence that people weren't used to or drug dealers weren't used to. So I'm sure before that, you know, if you look at the mafia and in the U.S., that there was violence. I mean, look at Al Capone, and that was alcohol, but what's the difference? You know, it's a drug and it's when it was illegal. So violence was used, but it didn't seem like, and maybe it was in Colombia, because I'm thinking of some of the stuff that Al Capone did, but maybe he wasn't even to the level of Pablo Escobar even in the beginning. But he said, you know, obviously this is a business that, what are you going to do? You're going to go to the police? You're going to go to whoever? This is an illegal business. And that's another thing. If it's legal, obviously there are ways around, you know, getting, if you still have the same system, because I was going to say, you know, of course, I don't believe in having police, so there would be, you know, security companies, and it would work that way, and that's how you'd have protection. But it would be legal, so you wouldn't have to worry about getting in any trouble or hiding it from anybody. Whereas where it's illegal, you can't, where are you going to go? So in that type of situation, he used violence to send it. It seemed like he used violence to send a message, to tell people, look, you're going to do this. Or he had his saying, the silver or the lead, where he'd pay people off or he'd kill them. So he was going to get what he wanted either by violence or, you know, take the money. Now, again, I look at all these things, and I'm not saying that they're not true, but, and I believe they probably are true. It's just, and I don't want to keep repeating this, but the society, I think, we live in, and I'm not even saying today, I'm saying always, that you're getting all your information really from the government, and they're going to make it look as bad as possible. And when I look at that, I don't know what's true and what's not. And you try to understand somebody like him. Did he look at it as business? Did he feel bad? I mean, he had his own family that I'm sure he loved and cared about. Was he somebody who just was a sociopath or a psychopath who did not have any feelings? Or was he somebody who looked at it as business? However, according to the information, again, all from the government, he killed a lot of innocent people. And that's where I have my biggest issue. But initially, he did use violence to take over Medellin as far as the cocaine trafficking. And there were, not all of it, because they had basically the members of the cartel, he didn't take them out before they became, quote unquote, the cartel. There were the, as I mentioned, the Ochoa brothers, as well as his cousin basically worked with him, was part of his group. And then there was Gacho, Jose Gonzalez Rodriguez Gacho, or Gacha. And he was very important because he's the one who set up all the labs in the jungle. And he ended up dying in a shootout with the police. They had arrested his son on a bullshit crime. He was 17. They followed him to where Gacha was. And he's actually played by Luis Guzman in Narcos. You might not know the name Luis Guzman, but if you see him, you know him. He's been in so many movies. He was in Carlito's Way. He played the guy who actually set him up in the end, but he was his main guy. There's just so many movies that he's been in. He's one of those guys that everybody knows who he is, but you might not know him by name. But he looks like he hasn't aged neither, because he's been around for years and he still just looks the same. I don't know. I think he's one of those guys who looked older when he was younger, and then he just didn't, so he kind of stayed the same. But he does a good job in playing him, but I guess it's a spoiler for the show, but I mean, if you know what happened, and it follows history for the most part, although they played some things up as they do in all series based on true stories. So he was killed in 1989, and that was a big blow to Pablo Escobar, because he was the one who set up all of those all of the plants in the jungle. But I believe it was the late 70s. I know when Escobar was 22, he was already a millionaire. So for him, he kept making more and more. He even made the Forbes list at number 8, having an estimated $8 to $30 billion. So this was obviously a guy who was pushed by the business. I don't know, and I know there's books about him, and I don't know what his motivation was, and maybe you get caught up in this thing. It's like George Jung had said that it wasn't about the money anymore. I could have got, I had my money. He was asked in an interview, in that same interview that I played, there's different parts to it, and that guy's a terrible interviewer, just to mention that. But he liked the thrill of it. That's what it was for him. And, I kind of know what he means, in the sense that when I was in high school, and this is nothing compared to them or anything like that, but just to relate it to that feeling, because it's a feeling of respect, that when, I sold like dime bags of cannabis in high school, and when you get that feeling of respect, it was kind of like not a high, but sort of, you felt like important, or you felt respected. And I understand to a point what he mean, but I mean, if I made $1 million, or, I don't think that would be enough in today's money, but 10 million or 20 million, and he made a lot more than that, I of course would be out. If I made enough money where I had enough security to take care of myself for the rest of my life, and family for the rest of their life, and even, to pass that on, I would be out. And that's it. So to make whatever George Jung was saying he was making, by today's standards, $1 billion, and he did lose it from having it in a Panamanian bank. He lost about 60 something thousand. However, I can't see that he didn't have money stashed somewhere. They had said in one of the documentaries that he had money in the walls of his house. So he probably had the majority of his money in the bank, but I couldn't see, I don't know, maybe it's just me. There's no fucking way that I wouldn't keep, if I had $100 million, that there's no way that I wouldn't keep like 10 million of it in cash and put, 90 million in a bank or something. Well, actually now I don't know that I'd even put it in the bank. I'd get a safe somewhere. But so he had kind of said, well, obviously I'm not going to, I don't know if it was in the interview I played or one of the, again, the same interview, but it was cut up. So getting back to Pablo Escobar, I mean, it didn't seem like he had any plan to get out. He had wanted this political power, and up until that point, and before the government kind of came after them, and that was probably after they assassinated the one, I'm not sure, and this kind of confuses me because of Narcos, if the candidate on the plane, because there was a candidate that got assassinated and then his manager took his place and ended up becoming president. But the candidate that was the actual candidate did get murdered in 1984. And after that, between that and the plane, I think 100 and something people were killed in the plane. So I was going into that he had told one of the people that work for him that they were going to record a conversation. So it looked like a recorder, but it was a bomb. And it blew up the plane. And you have, of course, 100 innocent people dying just to try to get this one guy. But they did get the candidate who said, and the reason why was because they said that they were going to reinstate, I don't know if they had it previously, but they were going to reinstate the extradition treaty with the United States. So first you had, I guess, everything. There didn't seem to be a lot of violence in general. Although I don't know that you can really say that because it doesn't go into detail of everything that happened before this. But there wasn't the type of violence that there ended up being while Pablo Escobar was running for Congress as an alternate and before the extradition documents or proposal came up. Before that point, and I believe that was around the early 80s, because I think it was 1982 that he actually got elected, there wasn't much violence. Well, first there were, I guess, the kidnappings and Carlos Leda, and in the show Narcos, they show somebody's sister got kidnapped because they couldn't get somebody, but he was kidnapped, he got away, and then they formed their group. They went after this group M19, which was a political group, and that's where they all got together and kind of started the cartel there. So I guess it first started I guess I'll call it extended violence, because it seemed like there was always violence, but it would depend on what happened. But there wasn't a, it was more if he couldn't pay somebody off, if somebody was coming after him and he couldn't pay them off, or something along those lines until the kidnapping. So to go back a little more, he grew up in Medellin. As I said, he became and you can read some of this in the article on nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. He became a millionaire by the age of 22, or at least it claims a million. I don't know that means, when they say millionaire, that he had just a million. It was in 1982 that I believe he was elected to or was that when the plane blew up? I'm sorry. Let me get back to. Yeah, it was in 1982 when the actual, I think the flights blew up, but the extradition issue came up around that time. And after the kidnappings, then they came up with another name, and it was, from going from being against the kidnappings, which of course they still were, and they made examples out of the people that were part of the kidnappings. They were now against this extradition because they knew that in Colombia they could continue to pay people off or kill them. Of course, in the United States, they wouldn't be able to do that. So going back to prior to the extended violence, Pablo Escobar was looked at as kind of a Robin Hood, and they still have respect for him in Medellin because he gave money to the church, he built houses, he gave money to the people, to the poor. And that's what he kind of ran on, and probably why he was able to become an alternate. And I don't understand how that works, that he ran as an alternate representative. And he talked from the standpoint of the little person and the small people ignored by the elite class. And he was one of those people before, of course, he became a millionaire or billionaire. And I think that all of them pretty much were all of the members of the cartel. But that was more in the 70s, the late 70s, when he started his success. And after the extradition proposal, or I don't know what I call it. Like I said, that's when things got really bad. Well, first he was thrown out of Congress, as I said. And then from there it was the extradition. So everybody got together to fight extradition. And it was the defense secretary that made all these accusations about Pablo Escobar, right in, well, at least in Narcos. It doesn't say where he made it in any of the documentaries, but in Narcos he made it in the, I guess it would be called their Congress or their House, in front of everybody, and he was forced to leave. So you have all that going on. You have him really wanting what it seemed like some political career, how he expected to sell, well, I guess look at Manuel Noriega. So I guess it is, and I was going to say how he expected to have a political career and be a drug dealer. Well, you know, look at the United States, who was bringing drugs in. So I should kind of, that really doesn't mean much. So he, from there, of course, he was very upset and with the extradition, and they killed the defense secretary. Of course, they don't have proof that he did it, but he was removed from Congress. There was a story published about him being a drug trafficker. The man who wrote the story, and I think, or was the editor for the newspaper, he was killed. And in 1986, Escobar declared war on the government. So you had at the same time these other members of the Medellin Cartel, and the smartest ones really did seem to be the Ochoa brothers. As Carlos later ends up getting arrested, and extradition did get signed by the current president after the defense secretary was murdered, and he was, I believe he was the one running for president. So after they did that, that's when he declared war on the government. Now, I look at that, and, you know, I don't know how I feel about that. Now, in according to some sources, they say that he was just killing everybody, that it wasn't just judges, it wasn't just government officials. Because in the beginning, it seemed like the only people that he would kill were people in the drug business, although I believe he did go after their families at times. But I don't believe that was in the beginning. That might have been later. But he did go after people's families and have them killed. But he pretty much stuck to government officials and police and judges. And I'm not saying this out of I agree with this or anything. I'm just saying that from what I got out of it, what I've looked at, that he focused on government officials who wouldn't do what he wanted them to do. Now, again, we can keep going back to the fact that if drugs were legal, there would be no Pablo Escobar. There would, but, well, I guess he was a millionaire, so he'd be a millionaire, not a billionaire, and for different reasons. But Colombia was a fucked up country to begin with. They said that the people had a saying in Colombia because it's such a beautiful looking country, but it's for it to be a shithole that what was the saying? It was something that they just put the worst people there in the most beautiful place. Of course, you know, the girls are beautiful. Colombian girls in general are very beautiful as well. So, and then I've never been to Colombia, but supposedly it's a beautiful place. But it's a shithole. I don't know where it's at currently. I haven't really looked at that. But I don't think it's gotten any better than it was, or any less corrupt. And of course, when you don't have jobs or people are getting paid decent salaries, they're willing to do things for money that they may not normally do. And a lot of it was just look the other way. And you know what, to be honest, the looking the other way when it came to drugs, there's the hypocritical aspect. And again, that's what bothers me. But if they look the other way for everybody, then I don't have a problem with that. But yeah, there is that hypocritical aspect if you're talking about the police, and Pablo Escobar is paying the police off, so he gets to ship his cocaine, but the other guy down the street gets arrested. Then, you know, you look at that, and that obviously is hypocrisy, because you have a guy who's getting paid to give one guy a pass, but then he's going around arresting other people. Or the same way you have somebody who, like former governor of New York, who used to be the attorney general, is putting people in jail for getting hookers, and then he's going to hookers. So I don't care what people do as long as they don't directly hurt anybody. But hypocrisy is what bothers me the most. You're going to be a government official and you're going to do certain things that are okay for you to do, but not okay for other people. So, but the whole smuggling of drugs, anything that had to do with drugs at all, I have no problem with. The problems I have with Pablo Escobar, obviously, are the innocent people getting killed. I'm not even sure that I have problems where if you're in a dangerous business like that, there are certain things that you may have to do. Now, the reality is that the majority of drug dealers, when we talked about that, you know, you have the main wholesaler and then you go down the line, the majority of the drug dealers down that line don't use violence nor need to use violence. There aren't many big cartels. Of course, the government wants you to think there is, so they can kick down people's doors in the middle of the night. But the reality is that, yes, cartels exist, but in the United States, your chances of, you know, outside of maybe certain street gangs, I mean, they're going with SWAT teams breaking down the doors of people who they know that they don't have to worry about shit. And they know it for a fact. But as far as what he did when it came to now, the violence definitely seemed very excessive, and he seemed to kill people to make a point. And that shows that how much can somebody's life mean to him if he's killing people to make a point. And yes, in the situation he was in there in Colombia, he had to make a point that, hey, look, if you fuck with my shit, I'm going to kill you. But I'm not only going to kill you, but, because sometimes the way you kill somebody, like they do in Mexico, they don't do that because they're sick or they're crazy. They do that as an example, like put people's heads on sticks or whatnot. They're not doing it because they're literally crazy and they enjoy that shit. There might be a couple people that do, that are fucking, sick fuckers, but the majority of them, they don't do it because of that. They do it because they're trying to make examples and scare people. And I'm sure it's very scary to a lot of people. But again, if drugs were legal in Mexico and the United States, and again, it's really the United States, but you wouldn't have that problem. But one of the things that is very strange in this whole thing, so you have what's going on in Colombia, you have the extradition, which, why does the United States give a fuck what's going on in Colombia anyways? Now, one of the things that the United States has been involved in forever, although it seems like they have pretty much stopped this. Now they're going, mostly after the Middle East. But for years, they would go after communist countries under false pretenses. Like, if they don't go into Vietnam, the dominoes are going to fall and the rest of the countries are going to become communists. Or if they don't go into, same thing can be said about South Korea. Or having the CIA and their operatives take people out of power like they did in, I believe, Chile, what they were doing in the whole Iran-Contra thing in the first place. And part of that, not part of it, the whole foundation of it was based on communism and socialism, because the Sandinistas were socialist, and the Nicaragua was controlled by the U.S. until, I think, was it the late 70s, when they fought for their freedom. So the Iran-Contra thing, and they asked some scary questions that, all this shit that people think like, oh, Obama put in place all these executive orders for continuity of government. He had nothing to do with it. It goes back, way back. And they were talking about this stuff in this video from '88 with Oliver North working on stuff that then they couldn't even talk about. But you get the gist of that he was working on things like suspending the Constitution. Oh, what a fucking surprise. So that's why when people talk about Bush, and meaning the most recent Bush, the dumb Bush, and Obama, and act like, everything was fine until they got involved. Reagan, it was, the damage that he did was pretty fucked up, between the Iran-Contra, between going after drugs, him and Bush Sr., or Herbert Walker Bush. So I'm going to talk about that on another show. I want to get some more information before I do. So let me get back to this. But there is a connection between the cartels, the Medellin Cartel specifically. Carlos later actually testified at Noriega's trial, who was essentially almost the equivalent of a CIA agent who they turned against because he got involved with selling drugs. And not because he got involved with the drug trade. I believe they wanted him to get involved with the drug trade, probably because people found out and they needed to save face somehow. I don't know enough about it at this point to really comment intelligently on the whole Noriega situation. But Noriega was involved with the Contras as well, and as well as Carlos Letter. And he got some time dropped because of it. He ended up getting now 55 years. So I don't know how much time he served, probably like 20. So, so after Pablo Escobar, and let me go to my article because I more want to talk about the opinions on what happened and why things happened than just a regurgitation of, well, this is what happened with Pablo Escobar. Well, Pablo Escobar did declare war on the government. It was about extradition. And the fact that he declared war on the government, you know, I didn't think about that in my article. And because it was somebody had made a statement in another source that I had come across after I wrote the article had said how he declared war on the government, which his actions were showing that, yes, he did. He was fighting the government. So I knew he was fighting the government, but I just hadn't heard it put, he declared war on the government. And in a way, it's hard to have respect for him because what they said he did, and this is what the government is saying he did, and whether he did this or not, I don't know. But they said he went after, when he declared war on the government, that he went after innocent people. He would just start killing anybody. Farmers or landowners or whoever. And that I can't respect in any way, to kill innocent people. There's one thing when innocent people get caught in a crossfire, but they claim that people were targeted. Now, if he targeted just the government because he didn't agree, but see, this wasn't a political thing, and that's the other side of it, where it's not like Pablo Escobar was a freedom fighter, although maybe he was, and they're painting him in a different light, but it doesn't seem that way from anything that I've seen, that he was any type of freedom fighter. He was just a drug trafficker who had a certain amount of arrogance. At least that's how they painted him. So to stop all the violence, because people were, Colombia was just insane. People were getting killed left and right. And they allowed him to plead guilty to a crime, do 5 years in a prison that he built, which basically wasn't a prison. It was like he built a house. And that after that, he would be able to be a totally free man. And someone had brought up the point. Now, this was, again, a government agent, a U.S. government agent, but their point is well taken about his family, that he tried to get his family out of the country. He tried to get them to Miami. They found out, they turned the plane, or not turned the plane around, but, after they got there, or they got them before they got on the plane. Then he got them to Germany. They got sent back. But they had said, well, if he cared so much about his family, why didn't he stay out of the drug business, or at least not kill anybody? Because what happened was that while he was in prison, this is a story that I have heard, and it's a little different in Narcos, but the real story was that the two guys that he had take over and run things for him while he was in prison brought him, they had so much cash, they were burying money. And they had brought him money that had literally deteriorated, and I'm not clear on how that made it seem like they were holding out on him, but maybe someone else found it or something. And they had told him, no, this is money that we buried. And from it being so old and being buried, that's, what it is. This wasn't money we were holding out. So he had killed those guys, him and one of his other guys that was in prison with him, because he selected his own prisoners. He had killed them in the prison. And of course the president found out, and then they said, okay, we're going to move him to another prison. And that started him on the run for the second time. So if he was just to essentially lay low, I mean, he had his own, essentially a house that he got to live in. Now, don't get me wrong, having to stay in one house and not being able to leave for 5 years is not fun. But they did get to leave because they showed how they'd go out in the caravan that was closed, and they had armbands on where they'd be able to pose as the guards and things like that. So they were doing all that stuff too, even though that was probably risky and they probably shouldn't have done it. And he could have, he was able to have his family over. He had a place for his kids to play, all of this stuff. It's not like he was living in a real jail. So, and he was already a billionaire. They weren't going to take any of his money. That's all they were going to do. And this was just to end the war, really, that he declared on the government. But they had said because of his ego and for whatever reason that he couldn't do that. So he killed these guys, which he shouldn't even had a reason to. Not that I'm saying he should have killed them. Either way, meaning I don't think it's right either way, but, they're in the business they're in. But he didn't even have a reason to kill them, and that's what got the president to essentially rescind the original offer. But he had it made in his deal. And the DEA, of course, couldn't shut up about it. In the presentation that I watched of the original agents. And the other thing, first of all, the DEA really shouldn't have been involved and shouldn't have had anything to do with this. Neither should the U.S. government. And that's what I was trying to say earlier. That what was going on in Colombia, for Reagan to I believe it was an executive order to say that it's a threat to national security, and use that as a way so they can extradite drug dealers or drug traffickers who've never stepped foot in the United States, who never even directly traffic drugs to the United States in most cases, meaning gave it directly to the person that was, well, I guess they gave it to the person that was bringing it there. But at the same time, they're giving it to that person and they're bringing it there. So for the U.S., who already was somewhat involved with the cartel themselves, bringing cocaine back, the hypocrites that they are. And if you look at during the time that Pablo Escobar was in quote unquote power, how many people did the U.S. government kill? You had the war. Well, I think the war in Vietnam ended around the time that Pablo Escobar started trafficking cocaine. But if you had all the same covert operations and things in the Middle East and those type of things going on during the time of Pablo Escobar, which was, the late 70s he was killed in 1993, I believe in December. However, you do have some presidents in there where there weren't really any major wars. There was the Kuwait-Iraq Desert Storm, but not a lot of people, so they say, were killed. But what about all the covert operations of the CIA? And we don't know about that. And we don't know how many people they killed. Did they kill as many people as Pablo Escobar? Probably more during that time. Definitely, there's no doubt in total. I mean, you could probably take the last 5 years and say in the last 5 years they've killed way more people than Pablo Escobar has. Not that I'm defending Pablo Escobar, but I'm looking at why did the U.S. government send DEA agents to Colombia to sign an order that drug traffickers are a threat to national security and to sign a treaty that these people that have never stepped foot in the United States can be extradited on drug trafficking charges. It seems pretty fucked up if you really look at it. Because look at the opposite. Look at any other country doing the exact same thing and saying that any American that ships whatever, say they deem something illegal, and any American that ships or that is considered a trafficker of it can be, and not only is a threat to their national security, but can be extradited to that country. Because it's the United States and it's cocaine, which is evil somehow by itself, even though people make the choice to use cocaine, which is their choice because it's their body that they own, which they have the right to put whatever they want into. Why was the United States so involved in what was going on in Colombia? And it wasn't from I know those agents got there later. They did get there, I think the first one, the late 80s. But I don't know what else they had going on there. If anything, maybe they didn't. But they did start that extradition in the early 80s. That they started those talks about extraditing these people and trying them in the U.S. Which, again, when you're talking about a sovereign country, and it's one thing if these people stepped foot into the United States and sold drugs there. That, although, again, I don't agree with, because I think all drugs should be legal for various reasons, it would make more sense. But they're going after drug traffickers who the majority of them, now Carlos later, who did actually get extradited, but had been to the United States before, and that's how he met George Jung. They were in jail together in Connecticut. So he had been to the United States before. But that doesn't mean anything because he wasn't selling. Well, actually, I believe he was actually selling cocaine in the United States. So that makes a little more sense, at least with him, if he was selling drugs within the United States, if he was distributing as well. And at least in Blow, the movie Blow, he was. Now, whether he was in actuality, I don't know. Well, actually, no, I do know because he was flying it in. So he was flying it into the United States. So for him, but that's not the reason why they extradited him. Think about this for a minute. You're extraditing people who did not commit a crime within your country's borders. And they were not even the direct person to bring the illegal substance into your borders. But because they're the United States, it's okay. And again, I can't stress this enough. They were getting cocaine from these people and bringing it back to the U.S. as well and taking the money and funding a war in Nicaragua. So Reagan and his cunt wife, and I'm sorry to say that, but you know, are doing these don't do drug commercials while they're involved in bringing drugs into the country. And these fucking conservative Republicans, and I don't believe in political parties, period. The Democrats and liberals and progressives and whatever, all you fuckers are just as bad. But they fucking sit there and worship Reagan and say how great a president he is. They never bring up Iran-Contra. Never. They never bring up the war on drugs. Most of them support it. And these are just things that I know about Reagan from, you know, being a little kid. I've never done a review of, you know, Reagan's presidency and any other negative things that came. I know they invaded Grenada. I don't know why. I know that there were some positive things, but Reagan was an actor. He was an actor as a president. He was an actor to the end. That's why he was I wouldn't say was a good president, but he said, this is what they're basing it off of. He said a lot of good things at the beginning that were very pro-freedom and anti-government. He actually said some things that I would consider almost somewhat anti-government, like government is the problem. Or that statement that it's not that. I don't remember the entire statement. I just remember the end of it, that government is the problem. And made a lot of statements like that because he was an actor. And I still hear a helicopter outside my house, unless it could be an air conditioner that's running, possibly. But so he was a total hypocrite, and allegedly, and I'll say this allegedly, the Iranians were paid off to wait however many days it was, 70 days or something like that, for Reagan to take office to release the hostages. So they would be released. So in, what was it, 78 or 79, if you've seen the movie Argo, that pretty much describes what happened for the most part, where in Iran they overthrew the Shah of Iran and took over the U.S. embassy and took hostages. And they weren't released until Reagan became president. Now, allegedly, that was because of a deal made prior to, I don't know if it was prior to the election, which it could have been because the election's in November. You take office in January. I think they were saying it was, but I'm not 100% sure because obviously if Carter had freed the hostages before the election, that possibly could have changed things. I don't know. I mean, things were pretty bad under Carter from what I understand when it comes to the economy. Carter was an unknown governor from Georgia who was part of the Trilateral Commission, and there's stuff about that you can read about as well. But not to get away from the topic here. So the guys that really ended up getting away with or getting out of this the most unscathed. And a guy says this, however, according to Wikipedia, the guy he mentions, Fabio of the Ocho brothers, was the one who went to jail for 30 years. Now, that might have been incorrect. The other two, Jose Luis and Juan David, they agreed to surrender and serve 5.5 years in jail in Colombia. And I don't think it was I think it was like minimum security jail and keep all of their assets. And they're still alive. As far as that, well, one of them it didn't say, but I believe they're still alive. Now, there's a guy who said, and I know this is an excerpt from a documentary that I've seen as well, that Escobar was the fall guy and that these guys were the real ones running things. They were definitely the smarter ones where they kept the most out of the limelight. Where you heard about, if you mention their names, nobody probably, people that watch Narcos now and might have looked into more things might know who they are, but they're the least known. I mean, Carlos Lerda, you might not know his name, but because of Blow, that helped. Plus, because of Norman's K, because he testified in the Noriega trial, he was well known. He also tried to start a political party within Colombia, as they were saying in the clip that I had played earlier. So speaking of clips, we're going to take a break, and I have a few more clips to play. Then we'll come back and wrap things up. Again, you can go to nonpartisanlibertyforall.com and read the article that I had written, which is a lot more organized and more about my opinions regarding what happened. It does go through what happened, but it comments a lot on the U.S. involvement and how the main theme, again, is that things should go back to how they were before 1914. And I mentioned how before 1914, which is the opiate law, which was the first law that they had passed, and then, they continued to pass laws against cocaine and cannabis and other drugs. but you could order two syringes, a carrying case, and it's morphine from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. So I do believe that that's how things should go back to, because if you look at what's going on in Colorado, and I saw a documentary on the opening of a store there and read things about the taxes and all the regulations and all the permits, and at some point, will they go further and try to track people? I mean, pretty much most of them are all cash businesses right now, because banks, they were having trouble getting banks. I don't know if they've gotten banks to take the money, accept their money, but they were having trouble. And that was partially because of the federal government, because remember, even though it violates the 10th Amendment, it's federally illegal. So they started violating the 10th Amendment for sure in 1914, which I'm sure they violated it way before that. They always talk about, it's funny, it's like every time they violate the Constitution, it's the first time. And they just do it over and over again. And it's a circle over and over, because people weren't around, don't remember, or just don't know about things that have happened in the past. And the same things keep repeating themselves, except it's worse each time. So something like Iran-Contra, all the things they said then are a lot of the things they're saying now. But that was, again, over 25 years ago. So let me play these clips since it's getting late and I have to make sure I get enough sleep. And we will be back after this. Be sure to check out the article, nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, and I will be posting more, not just on this topic, on other topics as well, but this is a series that I'm focusing on right now. I probably will have something regarding Iran-Contra, because it brought back memories of some of the things that I did know, and it just really disturbed me and reminded me of how people have just been saying the same things over and over again. You know, every election, it's the same thing, and it's been going on since I've been alive, and I haven't been alive that long. And I'm sure it's been going on since, my father's not alive anymore, but, since my mother was alive. And it's like drawing that line, and they keep crossing it and crossing it and crossing it. And maybe that was the intention when they wrote the Constitution was, we're going to write this, but we're going to start at this point and then just keep going, moving forward, taking away more freedoms. And that's what I think the point was, because that's what I think government is. So before we go to break, let me just again give you my definition of government. And government is there to eventually get to a place where it totally controls the lives of people and everything in society. It is not there for any other reason. It can't start off that way, but that's where it wants to get to. Government is there for the purposes of control. No other reason. So, nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Make sure you check us out on the website, and we'll be right back.
He may be one of the most infamous criminals of all time, but he's also a fascinating figure.
He had a lot of judges who were against him killed. That was his fight, trying to show Colombia that he was tougher than Colombia.
Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 most interesting facts about Pablo Escobar.
El Padrino, was Senor Pablo Escobar. And for those of you living on the moon for the last 20 years, he was it, the boss of it all.
For this list, we're looking at exciting and intriguing facts about Pablo Escobar, a Colombian drug lord who reigned throughout the 1970s and 80s and made headlines across the world due to his immense wealth, dangerous status, and revolutionary drug distribution network. However, we're not ranking the facts in terms of quality. Instead, we'll be going chronologically throughout the relatively short life of one of the world's most notorious criminals.
Pablo's policy in his war against the government was called plomo o plato, which means silver or lead. You can accept Pablo's bribe or you can accept his bullets.
Number 10. Colombia was violent before Pablo Escobar was born.
And true to form, when the pen failed, Pablo was always ready with the sword.
While Pablo Escobar may have contributed greatly to Colombia's violence and the perception of the country as a dangerous one, it wasn't exactly the safest place to live before he was alive either. Born the third of 7 children to a farmer and a school teacher in 1949, Escobar was immediately thrust into a hazardous society. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, Colombia was actually going through a period of political turmoil known as la violencia, which literally means the violence. This stemmed from the assassination of Liberal Party presidential candidate Jorge Eliezer Gaitán, with the ensuing civil war claiming over 180,000 lives. Number 9. Kidnapping and petty crimes made Escobar a millionaire at 22. Escobar had his sights and ambitions set on wealth and power from his teenage years, ever since he was a petty thief selling fake lottery tickets and scamming people on the street. This escalated into more serious crimes in his late teens, such as trafficking marijuana and stealing cars. In his early 20s, he dabbled in kidnapping, taking an executive from his hometown of Medellin and ransoming him for $100,000, which is roughly the equivalent of $600,000 today. All of this made Escobar a millionaire by the time he was 22. Apparently, crime does pay.
He imported exotic animals, had planes, helicopters.
Number 8. Escobar killed his way to the top.
Nosotros también nos vamos a desaparecer.
As you can imagine, a gang or crime family is bound to be full of violence and betrayal. Escobar knew that there was only one way to the top, and he took his chance. In 1975, at just 26 years old, Escobar wished to make a deal with the Medellin syndicate head, Fabio Restrepo, which involved 14 kilos of cocaine. Yet, because he was viewed merely as a petty street criminal, Escobar allegedly had Restrepo killed. He then informed Restrepo's employees that they now worked for him, effectively taking charge and beginning his ascension to drug baron.
He became the king of cocaine, the titular head of the Medillin Cartel. And the Medellin Cartel had the reputation, well-deserved in my opinion, of being one of the most ruthless, violent, murderous criminal organizations in the world.
Number 7. If he couldn't bribe you, he'd kill you.
Alguien en mi organización le dé el precio callejero de mi cocaína. ¿Cómo más indararía usted?
Escobar made many friends and acquaintances in law enforcement throughout his tenure as drug baron, often paying them off so they would turn a blind eye to his illegal practices.
Plata o plomo.
Obviously, not everyone took the bribe, resulting in his famous saying, plata o plomo, meaning silver or lead. In other words, take the bribe or be killed. This resulted in thousands of deaths, including the famous bombing of Avianca Flight 203, which killed 107 innocent people, and the DAS building bombing, which killed another 52. It's estimated that Escobar was behind between 4,000 and 5,000 deaths in total.
There was no institution that was safe from Pablo Escobar.
Number 6. His pilots could earn up to $500,000 per flight.
Pues vayamos directo al grano. Es que León nos comentó que vos estás transportando bastante marihuana en esos aviones.
Así es.
¿Y más o menos cuánto por vuelo?
¿A dónde?
Miami.
Before Escobar hit it big, he would personally fly small planes into the United States, with cocaine hidden in the tires. However, once his business took off, he began to employ professional pilots, who would smuggle in tons of cocaine for him. Oh, and we're not being vague here. We mean that they would literally fly tons, as much as 11 tons on one flight. And, depending on how much coke a given pilot was able to smuggle across, he could make up to $500,000 per flight. With a paycheck like that, it's no wonder Escobar's employees were so happy. Number 5. He was insanely rich.
But no matter what they did, they couldn't hide all that money. It just kept coming in.
Yep, being a drug baron is a sure way to make some good money, right? No, we mean he was insanely rich. As in, officially recognized as the 7th richest man in the world by Forbes Rich. Escobar's brother states that in the cartel's heyday, they were spending over $1,000 per week on rubber bands just to tie their stacks of cash together.
He had a zoo at his ranch. You're talking about Colombia. A guy had elephants, zebras, rhinoceroses.
Escobar was supplying 80% of the United States cocaine, and by the 90s, he was officially worth $30 billion. He even built a grandiose mansion on an island paradise and once burned $2 million in order to keep his family warm. Number 4. He became involved in politics to fight extradition.
Tienen sueños. Verán que no existen límites para lo que pueden lograr.
What's a career path that you probably never associate with cocaine manufacturers and smugglers? If your answer is politics, then you're underestimating the power of good old Pablo. In 1982, Escobar was elected as an alternate member of the Chamber of Representatives while he was well into his drug empire days. As a member of the Colombian Liberal Party, he aimed to gain enough influence in the country's politics to fight extradition. Escobar knew that he could never bribe his way around the law in the United States, and Colombian politician Rodrigo Lara Bonilla's public denouncement of Escobar and drug trafficking only fueled his hatred of the government. Number 3. He loved the poor and the poor loved him. Often considered a modern-day Robin Hood, Escobar often gave much of his riches to the poor, which garnered him praise and devotion.
We have an altar dedicated to Pablo Escobar because we believe that he was a very good man, and good men go to heaven.
In fact, there's a neighborhood in Medellin that still bears his name. Escobar was well known for his contributions to the city, which included sponsoring local children's football teams and building sports complexes, schools, and churches for the poor. In return, the poor defended Escobar until the end, literally. When he died in 1993, over 25,000 people showed up for his funeral, many of them members of the poor who still felt gratitude for his generosity. Number 2. He caused Colombia to become the murder capital of the world.
Este era un barrio invisible, una calle invisible. No se podía pasar de este barrio al otro porque ya se mataban.
It's a given that with the drug business comes violence. However, as we touched on previously, there was no limit to the extent of Escobar's wrath. His powerful influence and the wars that raged between cartels during his time led Colombia to become the murder capital of the world in the early 90s. In fact, the country suffered over 27,000 violent deaths in 1992 alone, which is equal to roughly 74 murders a day. What was his punishment for all of this? A personally designed jail, complete with a waterfall, bar, jacuzzi, and personal football field. To say he got off easy is a massive understatement.
And Escobar's reach was long. Barry Seal refused federal protection. He met his end in a parking lot in Baton Rouge. Whoops.
Number 1. The end game.
You're facing an enemy who's trying to kill you. In those kind of circumstances, the ultimate goal is to succeed, is to win, not to necessarily play by the rules.
What was the final result for Escobar? Let's just say it didn't turn out well for him. In 1992, a vigilante group calling themselves Los Pepes emerged, fighting fire with fire, burning down Escobar's compounds and killing family members.
And when they killed Parra, they also took his teenage son and murdered him too. They hung signs around their neck that said, "What do you think of the exchange for the bombs, Pablo?"
U.S. intelligence agencies began working with Colombian forces, and through radio triangulation technology, they were able to locate Escobar in Medellin, which ultimately resulted in a shootout across rooftops in 1993. While Escobar was fatally shot through the ear, it is still disputed whether the bullet came from the authorities or whether he pulled the trigger himself. Whichever the case, maybe crime doesn't pay after all. So, did you learn something new about Escobar? Did we leave any interesting facts out? For more informative top 10s published every day.
There was only one family at that time that I knew, and that family was from Medellin.
The Ochoa family was a highly respected family of ranchers with a great deal of influence in their home city of Medellin, Colombia.
So they have, of course, the captain and the head, the capo, which was, as many people want to believe that Pablo Escobar was the king of cocaine and everything, they can believe that. But the man that was really the king was Ochoa. And not Favito, the poor man, it was the old man. The old man was the silent man who never did a day in jail, who really controlled Escobar.
Fabio Ochoa, the patriarch of the Ochoa family of the Medellin Cartel.
They are credited with having created a Lloyd's of London for the cocaine trade in Colombia.
Rafa was like a lieutenant, and Rafa really controlled almost every kilo of coke that came into this country through the people from Medellin. Rafa knew it was coming, and Rafa knew who was getting it and how much they were getting for each one. And he made these people, I can't even be, I mean, you know, millions isn't enough, because millions isn't what he made these people. There was nobody higher than him for the Medellin Cartel in this country. And he had many soldiers, just like the mafia people have soldiers that would work for him. Some of them would sell the drugs, some of them were enforcers. He had accountants, lawyers.
So in your view, these fellas are not the cocaine cowboys?
Absolutely not. You know, he had everything in this country. And they were a well-formed group.
Guess what? They're not all different people sending this stuff in. It's one organization, the Medellin Cartel.
The feds charge the cartel controls 80% of the cocaine coming into the United States.
Federal authorities say these three men now run an organization more violent and at least as powerful as the American Mafia.
From my experience in New York with mafia people and from my experience with the Colombians, they made far more money, the Colombians, in a far shorter time than the mafia ever dreamed of making, ever. The Colombians have farms, fincas they call them there, just filled with cocaine down there because they just kept producing it. They had guys chewing leaves all night, working in factories and chewing the leaves. And these guys, you know, they worked nonstop. And down there, there's no industry. These guys were making their living doing this. These poor farmers and poor workers, they were getting paid a lot of money to do this stuff. And it was a whole process. It was like a factory working. And we worked with shortwave radios at the time. There was no telephone communication like people you see on the phones in the movies, you know. Hey, what's going on down there in Colombia? I need 600 kilos. It wasn't like that. We had antennas that would come up out of the ground, go 80 feet into the air for communication. We would have a certain time they'd turn their shortwave on, we'd turn ours, and we would talk that way.
But also at this hour in Miami, on a shortwave radio band that most radios cannot pick up, the coded instructions are coming in from a transmitter in Medellin, Colombia, for members of the world's largest cocaine smuggling organization. The cattle is ready. The cattle is ready. At 8 o'clock, 8 for the first one.
And that's how we would set up the trips. And we were contracted, actually, by the Colombians. I would make arrangements with them, and they would tell me, okay, there's 1,000 kilos, come pick it up.
Over the mountains, down, fly through a valley so nobody would see you.
And you never had a problem landing, you never had a problem taking off. It was all paid down there, the government worked with them, and we would send the plane down there.
You are listening to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio with your host, Dave Bourne. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
And we are back talking about Pablo Escobar and the Medellin Cartel, as well as the show Narcos. I didn't originally watch it because I thought it was about like Narcs, like it was undercover fucking narcs. I didn't know it was about Pablo Escobar and that whole thing. And if I did, I would have watched it earlier. And I ended up watching it, I think a few weeks ago. I had found out about it and finally watched it on Netflix. So I would recommend that you watch it. Just keep in mind that not everything in it is true. There are a lot of factual events in the show, and I believe it's 10 episodes, but not everything in it is true. So just keep that in mind. And it hasn't gotten to the point of Pablo Escobar getting killed or anything like that at this point. It actually, well, I don't want to tell people where it ended. But he's still alive, and you'll see where it ends. You also had the Cali cartel, and I guess Cali's a part of Colombia, who had a rivalry or were enemies of the Medellin Cartel, and were trying to sabotage them at the same time as well. And I believe that's who took over when the Medellin Cartel kind of fell apart. I don't know what happened to the Ochoa brothers as far as if they just got out of the business after that or not, after Pablo Escobar was killed. As far as what to think of somebody like Pablo Escobar, he obviously is easy to use as someone to demonize drugs, to twist things around into, well, obviously drugs should be illegal, because if they weren't, you can't go after people like this. But the whole thing was that Pablo Escobar, even if he wanted to do the same things he did, he never would have got the money if drugs were legal. Because maybe he could have gone into the legal drug business, but if drugs were legal, they would be controlled probably by bigger companies, or obviously people that are familiar with the pharmaceutical business. Because who wants to get drugs? And I've never bought drugs off the street. Well, the marijuana, I guess, when I sold it in high school. But outside of that, and you don't know what you're getting when you go and buy this stuff that's mixed up by, I mean, maybe some of the cartels or some of the people that are the ones putting the drugs together or mixing the drugs, the big cartels hire people that know what they're doing or actually have degrees in chemistry or something like that. I doubt it. I don't think everything's like Breaking Bad, where you have a chemistry teacher who knows what he's doing when he's cooking crystal meth. But it's different, I think, depending on what the drug is. But you wouldn't have somebody like Pablo Escobar involved, I would think, in the business, period. I mean, Pablo Escobar wasn't involved in the alcohol business. He wasn't involved in any other pharmaceutical legal business. So why would he be involved in the cocaine industry if cocaine was legal? And, you know, one of the biggest things I get out of this, besides the fact that, of course, none of this would have happened if drugs were legal. And again, like they were before 1914. But the U.S. government are bigger criminals than any of these guys. you know, you can look at these guys and say that they're evil and they killed people, and what they did was terrible. And I was trying to think of a word for, as far as not the selling of the drugs, not the distributing of the drugs, not even some of the violence against other cartels if they were attacked or whatnot. But it seemed like he just made examples out of people. He killed his way to the top. If you didn't do what he wanted, he would just kill you. You know, and thinking more about the political aspect, it seemed that it maybe was just more about fighting the extradition, not caring about the poor people. That's the only thing that I look at and question where somebody like this was coming from and how he justified everything that he did. And of course, eventually, you know, they had the DEA in there with them. They brought in even the Delta Force at the, you know, permission of the Colombian government as well. And I think they were helping to train the Colombian soldiers. It was the military that was going after him, obviously, because, I mean, the type of things that he was doing, blowing up a plane and, you know, car bombs and the violence, it was, I mean, I don't know how you would handle that someplace else or how you would handle that in the United States, although I don't think something like that would go on, because I don't think people would let it, and people are armed. So what was also the difference there? Well, part of it, I guess, is that he pretty much paid off the people and they loved him. So you have that as well. So it's hard to say. I mean, really, the biggest thing again is that drugs bring crime and violence. A lot of times they don't, but any crime and violence that happens because of drugs, not to mention the amount of money you can make from them, because you wouldn't make that kind of money if they were legal. As I was saying, every place they went, the price would go up. So to become a billionaire is only because it's illegal, you take a risk, and all of these other things, and you have to pay other people to take those same risks. If you're not paying people to take those same risks, then he's not a billionaire. He might have been a millionaire from the stuff that he did, because Colombia was a bad place even before he was born. But you eliminate a lot of the Pablo Escobar or the Medellin Cartel doesn't exist right now if it wasn't for that. Not to mention, you have the U.S. government getting involved, saying we want to extradite people that don't even come over here and commit a crime, that are committing crimes in other countries, but are getting other people to ship stuff here, which is pretty fucked up, while at the same time, they are doing the same thing. But for them, it's okay because they're supporting a war against communists. And in this case, it was a war, I guess, against a drug trafficker against the government. But really for him, it's crazy, because if he would have just said, fuck it, I got, whatever amount of $1 billion, I'm done, you guys fucking can take this over. It wasn't like a mafia that you're in for life or any shit like that, as far as I know. And it could have been, hey, I'll serve this 5 years in this nice house that's being called a prison, and then when I'm done, I'll take my money and go build a house somewhere, and that's it. And I guess they had intentions on turning it into a resort. It was that nice after the prison sentence was over. But he couldn't even wait, even to have everything still running and put it in the hands of his other guys. Okay, but it's just, then he ends up killing them and having to, whether it was his ego or, and you think about how somebody can kill that amount of innocent people. And I'm not talking about the guys that he killed there were innocent people, but the people, assuming that he killed the people on the plane and did what they said he did when he was at war with the Colombian government, where he was just, because they had said, and see, I don't know if this is true, but they had said he was just going out killing people just to kill people, just to show the government, hey, I can do whatever I want and I'm going to go out and kill people. That, I don't know if I believe, but the other stuff sounds, is the same story, and with everything that happened in his life sounds believable, but I don't know. And maybe, again, he was just a psychopath who didn't have any remorse. But that's not even the whole point of my whole point. It's just, there's so many things about this that are fucked up. There really is. Their solution to get rid of drugs and the so-called drug war is, well, take out the Medellin Cartel because they're the ones that are doing it. And then you have the Cali Cartel. And then you have later other cartels. And now you have Mexican cartels. And they're not going to learn. Never mind the fact that they don't have the right to tell you what to put in your body. And I keep going back to this fact. Before 1914, the government never tried to stop anybody or made any laws about what you can put in your body. Then they wanted to become your parents. And I'm not saying that they didn't have that goal. I believe that was a goal from the beginning, to control your life. But it took them a while. But until that time, you didn't have the government. What right does a government have to tell you what you can put in your body and what you can possess? So that's all we have for tonight. Again, please check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Check out our articles at Spreaker.com. You can find every show we've ever done, which is now over 300 shows. So you can find various topics there. Of course, the first probably 100 or so shows, our sound quality isn't as good. But at least the past, year and a half now, I think, something like that, when we got all the new equipment and got on Spreaker, and the sound quality is really good. So you can go check those out and look for new articles. Hopefully I'll have one done for this weekend. Oh, and of course, every Monday, Ellen / or should I say Dashball Stallone will be delivering a new episode of the Illumination Hour, which debuted yesterday. So you can go back actually now, and if you missed it, you can go to the archives and listen to it. It's a very creative and unique show, and I enjoyed it, and I suggest you check it out. So thanks, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow.
Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
He got out, in 2014. But in the movie, it makes it seem like he got sentenced in 87 when he got arrested, although it doesn't say the date, I believe. I don't believe it says that it was on that. But when he was arrested then, he actually testified against Carlos later, and he got to walk free totally, not even probation or parole. So he got off of that charge, but it was another charge later that ended him up in jail for the 20 years. So it was a little different than what they made it seem like in the movie. They made it seem like he was going away pretty much the rest of his life, although I will say that 20 years is a long fucking time. So, being in jail for 2 days, thinking about 20 years, I can't imagine how. And this is for drugs. And this is also a guy, we're not talking about Pablo Escobar and the Medellin Cartel yet. We're talking about George Jung, who was strictly, as far as I know, a distributor of cocaine. That's it. So in his case, he never hurt anybody. He wasn't an enforcer. He had nothing to do with that end of it. He was just the middleman importing the drugs into the United States and selling them. And I know some people have this whole fucking thing that somehow the drug dealer is responsible. We've gotten into, and I shouldn't say we, because I haven't, and I don't want to be associated with a we of anything, but the majority of Americans, or at least a certain amount, have gotten into this fucking mentality that somehow people are not responsible for their own actions. That's why so much government is needed in their mind. And that people not being responsible for their actions in turn means that somebody else is responsible for what they did. So meaning that in the case of someone becoming a drug addict, it's not their fault. It's the person that sold it, which is the most ridiculous fucking thing I've ever heard. And they apply that to various things. So I don't care if a person's trying to push drugs on you, unless, if someone had a gun to your head and said, if you don't inject this, then I'm going to kill you. Okay, that's a different scenario. And I bet the amount of times that has actually happened are, far and few between. And it has never happened as a way to get somebody to buy drugs from you. You see that in movies like, possibly it's happened in reality to, fuck somebody up while you're, trying to get back at them for something, or I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a scenario in a movie, because I have seen that happen in a movie. Besides that, I've never heard of it actually happening in reality. So, point being that if you use drugs or alcohol or cigarettes or any of these things, and being somebody who, I haven't drank, and I'm not somebody who goes to AA or considers myself an alcoholic, although some people might try to tell you that, but I just don't. But I've never done anything on purpose, really, and I've never done anything over 30 seconds. So I've never got anything that's been taken off. It's just you can't monetize it. And really, it's not like I make any money off of YouTube. I mean, I think in total so far I've made like 12 cents or something. So it's not a big deal or anything like that, but it just kind of sucks. It's like, well, how come I can't monetize this? And a lot of them were for not reasons of copyright, were for actual reasons of content. So I mentioned this before, but I want to mention it again. I did a bunch of shows on drugs, and I did some specifically on heroin and opiates. I think I did 2 or 3. And I didn't get on the air saying, hey, go do fucking heroin and go do opiates. They're bad for you. I've never advocated drugs in any way. I've never said you should go and do drugs. They're good for you. Nothing like that. I merely said that I believe they should be legal because, on so many different levels. And that's what the series that I'm writing on the war on drugs is about. It's not just about the war on drugs. It's also about the fact that they should be legal, and legal like they were prior to 1914. And if you want to know how they were prior to 1914, you could buy morphine in the Sears and Roebuck catalog along with a carrying case and 2 syringes. And that's what I believe. Now, that doesn't mean I advocate going out and doing it. And there's a difference that a lot of people do not understand because of their ignorance or for what they've been brainwashed or taught their whole life, especially if you grew up in the 80s and got the whole Reagan war against drugs bullshit. Even though Reagan, and I will do a show on this in the near future, possibly next week. I just want to make sure I have enough information to talk about it intelligently. But the Iran-Contra scandal, or whatever you want to call it, it's much bigger than a scandal. But what I'm going to talk about tonight, the Medellin Cartel, and focus on Pablo Escobar, but there are others involved. One of them, Carlos Later, who was the character in Blow. In Blow, they used the name Diego Delgado, and he was based on his character. But pretty much all of the things that happened in Blow relating to the character Diego were pretty much real, because I did go back, and George Jung, who was Johnny Depp's character, is out of jail now, and you can find interviews with him on YouTube. I actually have one that I might possibly play tonight. So he got out in 2014, and he's done interviews. Plus, I saw a documentary, because the book, I didn't know this, was actually written in 1994. And for people that have seen the movie, and I guess this is a spoiler alert, sort of, but at the end of the movie, he goes to jail basically until now. I mean, he gets sentenced to, at the time, I think it's earlier when he supposedly gets sentenced. And really, he got sentenced in 94 for 20 years. And he
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to pick the laws, we enforce them. But at the end of the day, each and every member is to go home safe.
Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne. It is June 7th, 2016, and we're coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, Tumblr, YouTube, Twitter, and SoundCloud, as well as by the next day on Stitcher. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty and self-ownership, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom. Exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And we are happy to hear from you. And you can reach us by phone at 702-470-7664 or via Skype at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. It is one word, and you can send a contact request. You only have to do that once. Let us know your name, what you want to talk about, and we'll get you on the air. And you can check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, which has the links to all our social media. Various articles, blogs, different things. I'm actually working on a series right now on the war on drugs, and we have 3 articles posted so far on that, and the 4th is pretty much done as far as all of the information is written out. It's just more of organizing it together, and we'll try to get that up there as soon as possible. And speaking of drugs, tonight we will be talking all about them. If you got a chance to hear the very beginning of the show, I played 2 songs about cocaine, which hopefully will not get my show, or this show, not my show in general, but this episode, not banned on YouTube, but they won't allow me to monetize it or whatever. Usually I've gotten copyright warnings. Feel like drinking anymore. Like, there's nothing stopping me from drinking as far as, oh, well, if I have a drink, I'll do something and I'm an alcoholic and I can't have a drink. Like, there's nothing like that. I don't like it anymore at all. I just don't. So, which I think is a positive thing, because I think alcohol is a very bad substance. But at the same time, when I did drink, if I did something stupid, that's on me. That's not on the manufacturer of the alcohol, or because this is what they try to do. So, being that I thought of this now, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I have a lot to talk about. But let's take alcohol and compare it to the Medellin Cartel as far as the distribution part. Now, we have a whole different story here because you have murders and things like that. And how much of the murders were done by the Medellin Cartel. Of course, the news says they were. And I was thinking about that earlier, and I don't know what to believe anymore when it comes to media. I don't know what Pablo Escobar did and what he didn't. I don't know what type of a man he was. I'm sure he murdered people. It's hard not to believe that part of it based on a lot of accounts of what went on. But did he commit every murder that the government claims? Probably not. But who knows? Maybe he did. The problem is you'll never hear his side of the story because they either he killed himself or they killed him. Now, his son came out with a book recently. I don't know how recent this was, but I'll play the clip. It's a real quick clip that he died the exact way he said he would, meaning that he shot himself in the spot, I guess in his temple or whatnot, where he told his son he would if it came down to that. Because in the case of the police, I mean, they obviously were going to kill him. They had said that before that, from what I understand and what I've heard. And I've watched so many documentaries now on Pablo Escobar. It's not even funny. And read a bunch of stuff as well and on different people in the Medellin Cartel, although I don't know as much about them. But he said that his son had said that he would have killed himself that way because he didn't say this, but I'm just saying this, that if the police shoot you and you could end up living, and that's probably the worst thing that could possibly happen, because not only do you get shot and seriously injured and who knows what the injury is going to be, then you're going to go to jail. And that's just, I'd rather just be dead, to be honest, or never be in that situation in the first place. But of course, assuming that you are, your choice is either getting shot and living and going to jail, or just dying. I personally would rather just die. But besides that part of it, so that's kind of that's being disputed by his son. That and does it really matter? Not to most people. I think it's an honor type of thing, or I had a friend say to me before when I was a kid that I'd rather shoot myself than have the police's bullets going into me or something. And this was when I was like a teenager, and I hung out with some people that I don't think they were people that really did anything serious, but they would talk like they did. But because usually the people that talk about shit aren't real, but not that this person did, but they just said hypothetically that they would rather shoot themselves than have the lead of the police kill them. And to me, I mean, really, what's the fucking difference? I don't care. If you're gonna die, you're gonna die. Just make sure that you're dead. I mean, that's all I would say in that situation. But if you take out the violence, and of course, the violence and the crime is because it's illegal. If it was a legal business, and we'll compare it to alcohol, which I think is a much more dangerous drug than what I know about cocaine. Now, I'll admit, I'm basing cocaine off of, I did do a psychology, an abnormal psych paper on crack and cocaine a long time ago. I've never done it. I know people who have done it. And so I'm basing it off of that. Then the actual experience of using cocaine, where I can say, you know, I've drank in alcohol so many times I can't count. But either way, if you look at, and I would say that what I've seen from cocaine and even the addiction, I guess on an addiction level, it's harder. That's the whole thing. I was kind of saying this to somebody a couple nights ago, that if alcohol was really easy to get addicted to, and this whole shit that doing something once and you're addicted and that's the drug's fault and it's not something within your brain chemistry, is a bunch of bullshit. Because I've talked about before that, you know, I had periods in my life where, you know, I broke my ankle. I took painkillers for 4 months and didn't have an addiction at that point at all. I stopped. I didn't have withdrawal, nothing after 4 months. So, and, you know, I've never done heroin. I've never done crystal meth. So I don't want to say that 100% I can tell somebody, hey, I know you can't, you know, get addicted from taking something once, but it's pretty hard to believe. I'll put it that way. I can't really, or don't want to speak for other people and their experiences when I haven't had those experiences or tried the same thing. But if you take a liquor company, we'll just, I don't know, Bacardi rum, or just Bacardi, and they make, you know, a bunch of rums, and they make those Bacardi breezers and stuff like that, and they're constantly coming up with new products, actually, of the different coolers. I know they've had a bunch, but rum, the Bacardi rum has been there for years, since